There is a moment, one single, breathless moment, when every secret you have ever buried decides to rise. Mine rose in front of 10,000 wolves. I had worn the veil for 6 years. Through winter ceremonies and harvest festivals, through slave auctions and pack gatherings, through every morning I woke up and remembered what I was. The veil was not beautiful. It was not delicate lace or shimmering silk. It was rough, undyed cloth, the kind they wrap around wounds they do not want to look at, the kind they use when something is too broken to display. I had learned to stop noticing it. I had learned to stop noticing a lot of things. But the Alpha King noticed everything. He stood before me on that stone platform, in front of every noble, every warrior, every servant who had ever looked through me like I was made of smoke. His fingers moved toward my face with the calm certainty of a man who had never once been told no. And in that silence, that terrible, roaring silence, I understood that my whole carefully constructed life was about to end. His hand found the edge of my veil, and he pulled. Before we step into tonight's story, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you hearing this under the midnight moon, or in the quiet of the afternoon? Drop it in the comments. Now, let the story begin. Chapter 1. The ceremony had been going on for 2 hours before they called my name. I stood at the back of the great courtyard of Varric Hold, pressed against the cold stone wall the way I always pressed against walls, quietly, carefully, like something that understood it was not supposed to take up space. The autumn sky above was the color of a bruise, deep purple bleeding into gray at the edges, and the torches lining the courtyard threw gold light across the faces of people who belonged here. I did not belong here. My name was Sable, not the name my mother gave me. That name had died with her. Sable was what the pack called me, because of my hair, because of the darkness they said followed me everywhere. I had stopped arguing with it years ago. You stop arguing with a lot of things when you are a scarred, wolfless woman living inside a pack that measures your worth by what your body can produce. I was property. Technically, I was more than that. I was the bonded attendant of Lady Voss, the Beta's wife, which meant I ate real food and slept indoors. But property is property, regardless of which room it is stored in. The ceremony was a presentation. Once every 5 years, Alpha King Karen of the Iron Fang throne traveled to each territory and reviewed its people, its warriors, its gifted, its promising young wolves. It was an honor to be seen by him. The entire pack had spent 3 weeks preparing. Nobody had told me to prepare. Nobody ever did. I was there to serve water and keep my head down. That was the entirety of my purpose on this particular evening. I had a clay pitcher in my hands and a veil over my face, and 6 years of practiced invisibility wrapped around me like armor. Then his herald called my name. Not my title. Not my position. My name. Sable. The word dropped into the courtyard like a stone into still water. Rings spread outward. Heads turned. I felt every eye in that space find me the way you feel a sudden wind, all at once, from every direction, cold and unavoidable. My feet did not move. The herald called again, and Lady Voss appeared at my elbow with her fingers wrapped around my arm like a trap. Her nails were painted red, and they pressed through my sleeve hard enough to leave marks. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her grip said everything. Move, or I will make you wish you had. I moved. The walk from the back wall to the center platform was 43 steps. I counted every one. The stone was uneven underfoot, worn smooth in the center from centuries of people walking this same path, and my sandals made almost no sound against it. Around me, the crowd rippled and shifted. Someone laughed, a short, mean sound, and someone else shushed them. A child pointed at me from her father's shoulders and asked why the woman was wearing a cloth on her face. Nobody answered her. I reached the platform steps and climbed them. 3 steps. The wood was dark with age, and it groaned under my weight in a way the stone had not, and that small sound felt enormous in the silence, He was already watching me when I reached the top. Alpha King Karen of the Iron Fang throne was not what the stories had promised. The stories said he was cold, mechanical, a king built from strategy and iron will who had not smiled since his mate died 8 years ago. They said he moved through rooms like a storm system, powerful, inevitable, without warmth. They said lesser wolves went still in his presence the way rabbits go still when a hawk passes overhead. All of that was true. But the stories had not mentioned his eyes. They were the color of deep river water, that dark, layered green that hides everything beneath its surface. And they were fixed on me with an attention so complete, so total, that the rest of the world seemed to quiet around it. Not the attention of a king reviewing property. Something older than that. Something that did not know the word property and would not have respected it if it did. He stood a full head taller than his 2 flanking guards. He wore no crown, only a dark clasp at his throat that caught the torchlight, and his hands were clasped behind his back with the ease of a man who had never once felt the need to defend his space. I kept my eyes on the ground 2 feet in front of him. That was the rule for bonded attendants presented before royalty. Eyes down, voice silent unless spoken to. His herald read from a scroll. Bonded attendant, scarred, wolfless. Age 24, owned by Lord and Lady Voss of Varric territory. No lineage recorded, no gifts recorded, no value assessment recorded. The words hit the air and lay there. In the crowd below, I heard a soft, contemptuous exhale. Beside me, Lady Voss straightened with the satisfaction of a woman who had just displayed something ugly and expected to receive credit for her tolerance of it. Then Karen spoke. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that does not need to be loud because the world has always gone quiet for it. Remove the veil. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. My head came up before I could stop it. Not at the command itself, commands I had learned to absorb without flinching, but at the tone of it. There was no cruelty in it, no prurient curiosity, no performance for the crowd. It was the voice of a man asking a question he already needed the answer to, for reasons he had not yet explained. Lady Voss went rigid beside me. The crowd went very, very still. My fingers found the edge of the veil and stopped there. 6 years of mornings. 6 years of pressing rough cloth to my face before I stepped outside. 6 years of being grateful for the hiding, of telling myself the hiding was protection, not shame. My fingers stopped, and then Karen moved. He stepped forward from his position, 1 slow step onto the platform, and every single person in that courtyard leaned fractionally back. Not from fear, from instinct. The instinct that lives in the bone, older than thought. The instinct that says something significant is happening. His hand reached toward my face. His fingers found the edge of my veil. And before I could breathe, before I could speak, before 6 years of careful invisibility could save me, he pulled. The cloth fell away. The scars on my face met the open air for the first time in 6 years, and 10,000 wolves saw me. In the silence that followed, Karen looked at my face. Not the scars, not the damage, not the story of violence written across my skin, but my face. My eyes. Whatever lived behind them that I had been hiding along with everything else. And something in his expression broke open like a wound that had been closed too long. "Who did this to you?" he said. Not a question. A reckoning. Chapter 2. I was 8 years old the first time I understood what I was. Not what I was told I was. Wolfless, half-breed, mistake. Those words had been in the air around me since before I was old enough to understand language. I mean the first time I understood it in my body. The first time my bones knew the truth that my mind was still too young to carry. It was the night of the first shift ceremony in my village of Dunrath, and every child between the ages of 7 and 10 stood in the forest clearing, while the full moon pressed down through the canopy like a hand pushing on water. One by one, the children shifted. Bones cracked and reformed in the darkness, and where children had stood, wolves emerged, small and uncertain and luminous with the newness of their power. Their parents wept. The elders sang the old calling song in low, resonant voices that vibrated in my chest. I stood in the clearing and felt nothing. Not nothing in the way of peace. Nothing in the way of an empty room that something important has already left. My wolf was not sleeping. My wolf was not late. My wolf simply was not there. And that absence was a specific, shaped thing, like a missing tooth your tongue keeps returning to over and over, long after the bleeding stops. My mother found me afterward, standing alone at the clearing's edge, while the celebration continued without me. She was Telva, and she was beautiful in the way that wolves who have loved deeply are beautiful. Not perfect, but lit from somewhere inside. She pulled me against her without speaking. She smelled like pine resin and warm bread and the particular clean scent that I would spend the rest of my life trying to find in other people and never quite reaching. "It doesn't mean what they'll say it means," she told me. I pressed my face into her shoulder. "What will they say?" She did not answer immediately. The silence lasted long enough that I understood, even at 8, that the answer was something she was trying to find a way to soften. "They'll say you're less," she said finally. "Let them. You and I will know different." She was dead before my 9th birthday. Fever took her in the deep of winter, the kind that comes fast and burns hot and does not negotiate. She was gone in 4 days. I sat beside her bed on the last night and held her hand and talked to her about everything I could think of. The 3-legged dog that lived behind the grain store, the way the river looked in late afternoon, what I wanted my name to be when I was grown. And she squeezed my fingers at intervals to tell me she could still hear me. Then the squeezing stopped. My father, Oren, was a beta wolf with a strong secondary mate already waiting. He kept me because pack law required him to, and he resented me for every year of that requirement. I learned quickly how to make myself small in his house, how to exist in the margins of his life without creating friction. I cooked. I cleaned. I did not speak unless spoken to. I did not cry where anyone could hear me. I taught myself to read from a box of my mother's books that I kept hidden beneath a loose board under my sleeping mat. At night, by the thin light that came through the gap in the shutter, I read everything she had left me. Old stories, healer's notes, 2 volumes of pack history that I read so many times the spines cracked and the pages came loose in my hands. I was 12 when my father's secondary mate, Pressa, came to live with us permanently. She had a daughter, Mira, who was 11 and wolf-gifted, and already beginning to show the kind of beauty that the pack celebrated. Strong jaw, bright eyes, a shift form that was reportedly a pale silver wolf, which was considered auspicious. Pressa treated me with the specific, refined contempt of a woman who had decided I was a problem she had not created, but was nonetheless required to manage. The first time she hit me, she used the flat of her hand, and a reason that was barely a reason. I had left a water bucket on the wrong side of the courtyard. The second time, she used a leather strap and a reason that was no reason at all. By the third time, I understood that the reasons did not matter. The hitting was not about reasons. It was about the particular pleasure that some people take in hurting things that cannot fight back. I was 13. I had not yet learned to fight back. That education came from a different source entirely. Her name was Wren. Old Wren, the pack called her, though she was not so old as the name suggested, only deeply weathered, the way people go when they have lived hard and outside for most of their years. She lived at the forest's edge in a stone hut that smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke, and she was the closest thing Dunrath had to a healer, though the pack did not call her that. They called her the Fix Woman, and they went to her in secret when they had problems they could not solve publicly, difficult births, broken bones, infections that the pack's official physician had failed to treat. She found me, sitting in the creek bed, behind the village one afternoon, ankle deep in cold water, pressing a bruised eye with a wet cloth. She sat down on the bank without asking permission, and watched me with the patient attention of someone who has seen many things, and has long since stopped being surprised by any of them. "You should put yarrow on that," she said finally. "Not cold water. Yarrow draws the blood back in." I looked at her. "I don't have yarrow." "I do. That was how it began. I spent 3 years going to Wren's hut whenever I could escape Pressa's notice. She taught me the names of plants and what each one did. Which ones stopped bleeding, which ones fought fever, which ones eased pain, which ones, taken in the wrong quantity, could do things that healers preferred not to discuss. She taught me to set a bone and stitch a wound and read the color of a person's skin for what it was telling you their body was doing underneath. She also taught me to fight, not with the elegant, trained combat of pack warriors, with the ugly, efficient violence of a woman who has learned that sometimes the only thing standing between you and the worst possible outcome is your own 2 hands and your willingness to use them. I was 16 when I used those hands on Pressa. She had cornered Mira, her own daughter, over something I never fully understood, some infraction real or imagined, and was raising the leather strap with the particular focused expression she always wore when she had decided that someone was going to hurt. Mira was pressed against the wall with her eyes shut. I stepped between them. What followed was brief and not clean, and would leave marks on both of us that lasted much longer than the moment itself. Pressa's nails opened the left side of my face from cheekbone to jaw, 4 lines, deep and ragged, pulling through flesh with the tearing sound that I would hear in nightmares for years afterward. I felt the pain as a distant thing, separate from what my hands were doing, which was holding her back and not letting go. She did not touch Mira that day. She went to my father that evening and told him I had attacked her without provocation. He believed her, or chose to believe her, which amounts to the same thing. He sold my bonded contract to Lord Voss of Varrock territory the following week. I was 16 years old, freshly scarred, wolfless, and transported 400 miles from the only home I had ever known. I had been wearing the veil for 6 years when Karen pulled it from my face. I had been waiting my whole life for someone to ask who had put those scars there. Chapter 3. Varrock Hold was a fortress that had been built to impress, and it succeeded in the way that all things built purely to impress tend to succeed, completely and without warmth. The stone was pale gray, quarried from the mountains to the north, and it caught winter light in a way that made the entire structure look cold, even in summer. The main hall could hold 500 wolves standing. The corridors were wide enough for 2 horses side by side. Everything about it was designed to remind you that you were small, and that the people who owned it were not. Lord Davin Voss was a heavy man with a careful mind and a face that gave nothing away. He was not cruel in the way that Pressa had been cruel, impulsive, personal, heat-driven. He was cruel in the administrative way, the way of someone who had simply decided that certain categories of people did not require the same considerations as others, and who acted from that decision with complete consistency and 0 malice. It was, in many ways, harder to endure. Malice at least acknowledges your existence. Lady Voss, Seren, was something else entirely. She was beautiful in the sharp, angular way of winter birds, all clean lines and bright eyes, and the constant, subtle energy of a woman perpetually calculating her position. She had been born into a minor pack with significant ambitions, and she had married Davin Voss with the precision of a chess player advancing a critical piece. Everything she did was in service of something else. Her kindness, when she displayed it, was always pointed at a specific target. Her cruelty was the same. She decided what I was within the first hour of my arrival. Useful, controllable, scarred enough to be unthreatening, capable enough to be worth keeping. She put the veil on me herself. I remember the weight of it. The rough cloth against my face, the left side, always the left side, where the scars pulled the skin tight over my cheekbone and made the corner of my eye feel perpetually raw. She tied it at the back of my head with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone performing a routine task, and then she stepped back and examined me with her head tilted slightly to the right. "Much better," she said. "You'll wear it whenever you're in public spaces. I won't have people staring. It's distracting." I said nothing. I had learned that nothing was the correct answer to most things in this house. The other bonded attendants were a small, careful group of people who had developed, over years of proximity, the particular social language of people who survive by monitoring everything and revealing little. There was Fenwick, who was 60, and had been with the Voss household since before Seren arrived, and who regarded me with the quiet solidarity of someone who recognized a fellow long-term prisoner. There was Ulla, who was young and wolf-gifted, and bonded to the house for debt reasons she never fully explained, but which clearly caused her significant shame. There was Kale, who was silent in the way of someone who had once been loud and learned from it. We did not discuss our circumstances. We discussed tasks, schedules, what Lady Voss wanted for dinner, and whether the winter stores were sufficient, and whether the weather would hold for the northern courier to arrive on time. We were good at the surface of things. We had all learned that the surface was where it was safe to live. I spent 6 years on that surface. I worked. I was good at the healing Ren had taught me, good enough that Lady Voss found it convenient to use me for minor medical tasks when the pack physician was unavailable. I was discreet. I did not take up space. I wore the veil and I kept my eyes down, and I read at night by candlestub, and I missed my mother with a grief so old and so constant that it had become simply part of the texture of my existence, the way an old scar becomes part of the texture of skin. I did not expect to be seen. I had stopped expecting that a long time ago. The day the Iron Fang banners appeared on the horizon, dark red and black, carrying the snarling wolf crest of King Karen's house, the entire hold began to vibrate with a specific, barely contained anxiety. Servants pressed their uniforms. Warriors drilled in the courtyard with renewed urgency. Lady Voss moved through the halls in a state of intense, controlled excitement, her voice clipped and precise, her attention snapping from detail to detail, like a bird hunting. She did not speak to me beyond her usual instructions. I was to serve water in the courtyard during the presentation ceremony. I was to remain at the back. I was to keep the veil straight and my posture correct and not draw attention in any direction. I heard her, and I intended to follow every word of it. What I did not know, could not have known, was that the Alpha King had sent his herald ahead with a specific instruction, a list of names to be called forward during the presentation, names of people his scouts had flagged during their advance survey of the territory, people who existed in the records with inconsistencies, absences, questions left unanswered. My name was on that list. I did not know why then. I learned later that Karen's scouts were not merely cataloging warriors and gifted wolves. They were looking for something specific, something his advisors called an irregularity, and which Karen himself apparently called a signal. He had been traveling his territory for 2 years, presentation by presentation, reviewing each pack, and in each pack his scouts had noticed the same pattern. Bonded attendants who appeared in household records without origin documentation, people who existed in the system without a clear lineage trail, people whose official histories began abruptly, as if the years before a certain date had been deliberately removed. I was one of those people. What Karen's scouts had found in the records they were not supposed to be able to access was a single notation in the Iron Fang's own ancient lineage registry, buried under 17 years of subsequent entries. A notation that named a child born to a registered wolf woman in the northern village of Dunrath. A child with a specific bloodline marker that the registry classified as dormant. A classification used for wolves whose gifts had not manifested in the usual way, but who nonetheless carried something the old records considered significant. My mother's name was in that registry, and beneath her name, so was mine. I did not know any of this when the herald called my name across the Varric Hold courtyard. I knew only the cold stone under my feet, and the weight of the veil against my scars, and the 43 steps between the back wall and the platform where everything I thought I was about to end. Karen's hand reached for my veil, and somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, I understood that he already knew something about me that I did not know about myself. Chapter 4. His hands dropped to his sides after the veil fell. He stepped back, one precise step, and clasped them behind his back again, and his eyes did not leave my face. Not the scars. My face. The distinction felt important in a way I could not immediately name. Lady Voss made a sound beside me. Not a word. A sound. The kind that comes from the throat when the body needs to express something the social situation will not allow. Protest, maybe. Or fear. Her hand found my elbow, and her grip was tight, tighter than in the walk to the platform, and I understood that whatever she had expected from this moment, this was not it. The crowd below the platform was silent, with the specific quality of silence that is not peace, but held breath. Karen looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Lady Voss. "How long has she been in your household?" His voice was the same as before, low, unhurried, carrying without effort. But something in it had changed. The temperature of it, maybe. The way winter water is technically the same water as summer water, but is not the same thing at all. Seren Voss had excellent composure. She had built her entire life on that composure. But I felt her hesitate, a fractional pause before her answer, a quarter second in which she was calculating something. 6 years, Your Majesty. And before that? Another pause. Shorter this time, because she had already done the calculation. She came to us as a bonded attendant. Her previous household transferred the contract. What household? Her father's, Your Majesty. In Dunrath. Karen's gaze moved back to me, and whatever question he had been building toward arrived in his eyes before it arrived in words. What is your name? Everyone in the courtyard heard him ask me directly, not his herald, not a scribe. Him, with his eyes on my scarred face and his voice arranged into something that was not quite gentleness, but was in the same family as it. Sable, I said. That's not a name. That's a description. He said it without judgment, as a person states a fact they have already confirmed. What did your mother call you? My throat closed. I had not been asked that question in 16 years. I had not said the answer aloud in all that time. The name my mother had given me felt like something I had locked in the same place I kept the memory of her voice, somewhere so carefully stored that taking it out felt dangerous, like removing a stone from a wall and not knowing what the wall was holding back. From the crowd below, a low murmur was building. I could feel it against my skin like a change in air pressure before a storm. Speak, Lady Voss said beside me, very quietly, with the particular edge she used when she needed me to comply and needed it not to look like a command. I found my voice. Lysa, I said. She called me Lysa. The name came out rough and strange in my mouth, like a word in a language I used to speak fluently and have since nearly forgotten. Karen was still watching me. Something had shifted in his expression. Not visibly. Not in any way that anyone more than 2 feet away could have read. But I was 2 feet away, and I could see it. A settling. The way a person looks when information they have been searching for has finally confirmed what they already suspected. Lysa of Dunrath, he said. The formal construction of it landed on me like a hand pressing down on my shoulders. Not violently, with weight. Yes, I managed. He turned then, for the first time, to address his herald. The conversation that followed was in the rapid shorthand of officials, much of it below the level of the crowd's hearing, and I caught only fragments. Registry, cross-confirmation, northern lineage designation. The herald produced a document from the leather satchel at his hip and handed it to Chiron, who looked at it for a moment with the focused attention of a man confirming something rather than discovering it. Then he turned back to the crowd. His voice lifted, filling the courtyard with the easy authority of someone who has never once had to repeat himself. This woman's bonded contract is hereby dissolved under Iron Fang royal authority. Her lineage has been identified and registered. She will accompany the royal party as a ward of the crown, pending full documentation. The silence that followed lasted approximately 1 full second. Then the courtyard erupted. Not in celebration, not in protest. in the particular chaotic noise of 500 people simultaneously reacting to something they did not understand and did not have sufficient information to process. I stood in the center of it, on the platform, with my bare face exposed to open air for the first time in 6 years, and I felt the noise wash over me without quite reaching me. Lady Voss's hand released my elbow. I did not look at her. I could not look at her and remain upright. A guard appeared at my other side, one of Kairin's in Iron Fang dark red, and gestured toward the platform steps with the practiced courtesy of someone accustomed to escorting people who are not entirely certain what is happening to them. I descended the steps. Below the platform, the crowd parted, and I walked through it in the open air, and the autumn light touched the left side of my face where the scars were, and the wind moved against my skin, and I kept my eyes forward and my spine straight, and I told myself I was not going to cry here, in front of all of them. I almost managed it. It was Fenwick who undid me. Old Fenwick from the Voss household, standing near the edge of the crowd, with his hands clasped in front of him, and his weathered face doing something I had never seen it do in 6 years of shared surfaces. He was weeping. Silently, without making a performance of it, with the simple, uncontrolled grief of someone who has watched an injustice for a very long time, and is only now being allowed to feel it. He met my eyes as I passed him, and then I was past him, and the crowd closed behind me, and I was walking into whatever came next, with my face uncovered for the first time in 6 years, and somewhere behind me, I could hear Lady Voss's voice beginning the careful process of explaining herself to people who were asking questions she had not anticipated needing to answer. I did not stop walking. I did not look back. Chapter 5. They gave me a room, not a servant's alcove, not a storage space with a mat on the floor, not a servant's alcove, not a storage space with a mat on the floor. A room in the guest wing of Varric Hold's eastern tower, with a proper bed and a window that faced the mountain range to the north, and a small iron brazier that one of Kairin's attendants lit without being asked. There was a wooden chest at the foot of the bed, empty, and a water basin on a stand by the window, and a single candle on the table beside the bed that burned with a steady, unflickering flame. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time and looked at all of it, without touching any of it. The candle burned. The mountains outside the window were turning dark blue in the evening light. Somewhere in the hold, a door opened and closed, and I heard footsteps in the corridor that passed my door without stopping. I raised my hand and touched the left side of my face. The scars were familiar under my fingertips. I had touched them often enough in private, in the dark, in the early years when the pain still flared, and I needed to map where it was coming from. 4 lines, running from cheekbone to jaw. The topmost was the deepest. It pulled the skin slightly when I smiled, which was one of several reasons I had largely stopped smiling in company. They were old enough now to be smooth, the angry texture of new scarring long since settled into something quieter. But I had not felt open air on them in 6 years. That was different. That was something I was still processing in a part of my mind I did not have immediate access to. A knock at my door. Not Kairin. I knew it was not Kairin even before the door opened. I do not know how I knew. His presence had a specific quality, a particular pressure in the air, something that arrived before him and lingered after. And it was not present in the corridor outside my room. It was a woman. Young, perhaps 20, with the alert eyes and quiet efficiency of someone who has been trained to service without intruding. She carried a tray, real food, actual food, not the leavings that bonded attendants ate after the household had finished, and she set it on the table beside the candle and stepped back with her hands folded. "The king requests your presence after you've eaten and rested," she said. "There is no urgency. He will be in the document room on the 2nd level whenever you are ready." I looked at the food. Warm bread, roasted root vegetables in dark sauce, a small bowl of preserved berries, which were a luxury this far into autumn. Someone had thought about this, specifically. Someone had considered what a person who had been living as a bonded attendant for 6 years might need after the day she had experienced. "Thank you," I said. The attendant left. I ate alone at the table with the candle burning, and outside the window the mountains went from dark blue to black, and the first stars appeared, cold and sharp and very far away. When I found the document room, Karen was standing at a table covered in maps and papers, reading something with the focused concentration of a man working. He did not look up immediately when I entered. He gave me 2 full breaths to exist in the room before he closed the document and turned. His eyes went to my face. They would keep doing that. I had already begun to understand this about him. Not in the way people stared at the scars, with the involuntary flinch of encountering something outside the expected. He looked at my face the way you look at something you have been trying to locate and have finally found, with recognition, with relief. It was more than I knew how to handle. I looked at the table. "Sit," he said, and gestured to a chair across from him, and the word was not a command, but an invitation shaped like one. I sat. He sat across from me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The fire in the room's grate shifted and resettled. Outside, the wind had picked up, pressing against the shuttered window with a low, persistent sound. "The registry marks you as dormant gifted," he said. "Do you know what that means?" "No, your wolf didn't manifest in the usual way. That's different from not having a wolf." A pause. "You've been told you're wolfless." It was not a question. He already knew the answer. "My entire life," I said. Something moved across his face, brief, controlled, but there. Dormant gifted wolves are rare. They carry a different kind of bond to their wolf. Not the shift, at least not in the conventional sense. Something older. The old records call it a deep bond. It presents differently in each case. His eyes stayed on me. "Have you ever experienced anything you couldn't account for?" I thought about Wren's hut, the nights I spent there learning plant names and their uses, and the strange, certain knowledge that sometimes arrived before I consciously understood a situation. The way I had known, from across a room, that a child had a fever before I had close enough to feel her skin. The way injured animals had followed me from the forest's edge on 3 separate occasions over the years, standing at a specific distance as though waiting for something I didn't know how to give them. I had attributed all of it to Wren's training, to paying close attention, to the kind of careful observation that becomes instinct after long enough. "Perhaps," I said carefully. Karen watched me. "I'm not trying to unsettle you," he said. "I want to understand why you've been living as someone's property for 6 years when you had rights of lineage that should have been flagged the moment your father transferred your contract." His voice had shifted. Still low, still controlled, but underneath the control, there was something running. A current of something that was not cold at all. "Because no one looked," I said. The answer was simple. It was the simplest answer to the simplest question, and it landed in the room between us with the weight of everything it contained. He held my gaze for a long time. "I'm looking now," he said. Chapter 6. The royal party remained at Varric Hold for 4 more days. I learned a great deal in those 4 days, and most of it arrived sideways, through things I overheard in corridors, through the behavior of people around me, through the 1,000 small signals that a person who has spent years reading rooms for survival develops without realizing it. I learned that Lord Voss was deeply uncomfortable. He moved through the hold with the careful, over-controlled energy of a man walking on ice he suspects is thin, attentive, precise, nothing to excess. He had not spoken to me directly since the ceremony. When our paths crossed in the great hall the morning after the presentation, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen from him before. Not contempt, not administrative dismissal, concern. I found it, in its own way, more disturbing than contempt. I learned that Lady Voss had requested an audience with Karen and been told he was occupied. She had requested again the following morning and been told the same thing. By the 3rd day, she had stopped requesting and started waiting with the rigid composure of a woman who is extremely angry and has nowhere to put it. I learned that Chiron's senior advisor, a tall, dry man named Edric, who wore his gray hair close-cropped and carried a permanent expression of contained skepticism, had spent the day after the presentation in the Hold's records room, asking questions of the household scribes. Some of those questions, which I learned from Ula, who had overheard them while delivering water, were about my bonded contract. when it had been filed, who had witnessed it, whether the lineage notation field had been left blank deliberately or by oversight. The scribes had said, by oversight. Edric had not appeared to believe them, and I learned about Mira. I had not thought about Mira in years, deliberately not thought about her in the way you avoid pressing on a bruise. She was Pressa's daughter, the girl I had stepped in front of all those years ago in Dunrath, and then I had been gone, and I had told myself that my protection was not the only thing standing between her and harm, and I had believed that because I needed to. One of Karen's scouts brought news from the north on the third day. Routine territory intelligence passed through the king's daily briefing. I would not have known it existed except that the scout, a quiet young woman named Breck, came to find me specifically in my room that evening. She sat across from me with the careful posture of someone delivering information they have been asked to deliver and are not sure about. "The king thought you should know," she said. "There are reports from Dunrath Pack. A young woman named Mira, bonded status, debt contract. She's been in the Dunrath household records for 3 years." The cold arrived in my chest so quickly and completely that for a moment I could not locate my breath. Whose household? Breck's expression did not change. Her mother's. The woman who had scarred my face had bonded her own daughter. I sat with this information in my body and felt the way it rearranged things, old things, settled things, the narrative I had built around Mira as someone I had protected once, and then released into a life better than my own. I had told myself that story for 6 years. I found Karen in the corridor outside his rooms that night, not waiting for him, not seeking him, just walking, because I had needed to move and the corridor had been empty. He was coming from the other direction with Edric beside him, both of them mid-conversation, and they stopped when they saw me. Edric looked at me with his permanent skepticism. Karen looked at me the way he always looked at me, and immediately something in his reading of my face shifted. What happened? Edric made a small, controlled sound that might have been a sigh. I told him about Mira, briefly, without excess. The way Wren had taught me to report a patient's condition. What was relevant, in what order, without sentiment clouding the facts. Karen listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You want her extracted. She's there because of me. She stepped out of the path of harm once, and I stepped into it, and then I left, and the harm found her again. That is not your fault. No." My voice was steady enough. "But it is my concern." He looked at me for a long time. In the low light of the corridor, with the torches spaced widely and the shadows filling the space between them, his face was all angles and dark river eyes and the particular quality of attention that I was beginning to recognize as simply him, the way he was, always, with everything, complete, undivided. "I'll send orders to the Dunrath Packmaster tonight," he said. "Her contract will be dissolved by the end of the week." The relief hit me so hard, my hand found the wall. "Thank you." He stepped closer. Not intrusively, but closer than the formal distance that had been maintained between us since the presentation, and I was aware of the shift the way you are aware of a change in temperature. "You should know," he said quietly, "for me, not for Edric, not for anyone else in the corridor, that I have spent 2 years conducting these presentations because of you. Not you specifically. The pattern your situation represents. The number of people living in records gaps, contract irregularities, deliberately missing lineage data." I looked at him. "Someone has been removing people," he said, "from the records, systematically, for at least 20 years, taking wolves with dormant gifts or complicated bloodlines and erasing their legal identity so they can be moved through the bonded system without protection." He paused. "Your file was one of 17 I found with the same signature removal pattern." The corridor was very quiet. "Who?" The word came out small. "I don't know yet." His voice was honest, specifically, deliberately honest. "But I will." He held my gaze for a moment longer. Then he and Edric continued down the corridor, their conversation resuming in low tones, and I stood against the wall, with my hand still pressed to the stone, and the cold in my chest rearranging itself into something different. Not fear. Not the old, familiar fear that had kept me small and veiled and silent for 6 years. Something that had not found a name yet, but was reaching for one. Chapter 7. We left Varek Hold on the 5th morning, and the journey to the Ironfang capital took 11 days through the mountain passes. I had never traveled beyond the territory of Dunrath before my bonded contract transferred me to Varek. I had never seen the northern passes, the way the landscape narrowed between walls of ancient rock until the sky became a strip of pale gray overhead. I had never seen the high plains on the other side, where the grass was already winter gold and the horizon went on for so long it felt like looking at the concept of distance rather than an actual thing. I watched all of it from horseback with the specific hunger of someone who has been in small rooms for a long time. The royal party traveled efficiently, a column of guards, advisors, scouts ranging ahead and behind, Karen at the center of it, with the unhurried authority of a man who knows exactly where he is going and has never doubted his right to go there. I rode near the middle of the column, between two of the attendants, which was where Edric had placed me with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man organizing baggage. I was not baggage, technically. I was a ward of the crown. I was still working out what that meant. On the 3rd day of travel, we stopped at midday beside a river that ran clear and fast between dark rocks, and while the horses drank and the party ate from packed provisions, Chiron came to sit beside me without ceremony or announcement. I had learned by then not to startle when he appeared. He had the quality, or perhaps the habit, of being present before you registered his approach. He sat on a flat stone by the water's edge with his forearms on his knees, looking at the river, and I sat a foot away and looked at it too. And the silence between us was not the tense, negotiated silence of two people managing each other. It was the other kind. "You've been quiet," he said. "I'm often quiet." Not the same quiet as now. I looked at the water. Clear all the way to the riverbed. I could see every stone on the bottom, brown and gray, and occasionally a flash of quartz that caught the light. "I keep thinking about the others," I said. "The 17. He waited. If someone removed us from the records deliberately, if our lineage was hidden to move us through the bonded system, then whoever did it had access to the registry. I turned to look at him directly for the first time since he sat down. That means someone inside the Iron Fang administration. The river ran and ran. "Yes," he said. "You already knew that. I suspected it before the presentations began. I confirmed it over the past 2 years." He looked at the water. "It's why the presentations have been structured the way they have. Not just to review territories, to audit them, to find the gaps and cross-reference them against the registry access logs. And 31 gaps across 9 territories in 20 years. His voice was level but tight underneath, the way a river is level at the surface over something fast-moving below. 31 people whose lineage data was removed or altered. Of those, 11 are dead. 7 cannot be located. 13, including you, have been found. 11 dead. The number sat in my chest like a stone. Who has access to the registry? A pause, long enough to tell me something about the shape of the answer before he gave it. Senior members of the Pack Council, the King's own family lineage office, and 3 external families who were granted custodial registry rights under a treaty signed 22 years ago. 22 years ago. 20 years of missing people. 2 years before it started, I said. His head turned toward me. Yes. Something moved in his expression. You're quick. I've spent 6 years reading rooms. My voice came out flat. Not angry. I was not angry at him. At the fact. At the 22 years. Which families? He was quiet for a moment. One of them is Voss. The river kept running. Lady Voss, who had put the veil on me and told me to stop drawing attention. Lord Voss, who had looked at me with concern rather than contempt in the Great Hall. The concern of a man calculating exposure. She knew who I was, I said. Not a question. I believe so. I believe she took your contract specifically, not randomly, not because you were available, but because keeping you as a bonded attendant inside her household was safer than allowing you to exist freely where someone might eventually cross-reference your lineage. Safer for whom? For whoever is at the center of it. His voice held something that was not quite anger, but was anger's quieter, more determined cousin. Voss is not the origin. She's a mechanism. Someone further up gave the instruction. I thought about the 11 who were dead. I thought about the 7 who could not be found. I thought about the precise, administrative cruelty of removing a person from the records, not killing them, not confronting them, just quietly erasing the legal identity that gave them rights and protection, and then waiting for the bonded system to do what it does to people who have no protection. Why? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Why dormant gifted wolves specifically? What is it that we have that someone needs removed? Karen turned to look at me fully. That, he said, is the question I've been trying to answer for 2 years. The midday pause ended. The column reformed. We rode through the afternoon with the mountains falling behind us and the capital still days ahead, and I sat with the knowledge of 31 gaps and 11 dead and rode toward whatever answer was waiting at the other end of the journey. That night, camped on the high plain with the fire burning and stars overhead like thrown salt, I lay awake and thought about dormant gifts, about the deep bond that the old records described, about the certain knowledge that had arrived in me at odd moments over the years, the child's fever, the animals at the forest edge, and for the first time, I let myself think about what I had felt, standing on that platform with Karen's eyes on my face. The moment his hand reached for my veil before he touched it, something in me had gone very still in the specific way that stillness is not absence, but the highest possible presence. My wolf, the one they had told me was not there, had risen in my chest like a tide. Not in fear, not in defense, in recognition. Chapter 8. The Iron Fang capital was called Karath, and it sat in the bowl of a valley ringed by mountains on 3 sides, the 4th side opening onto a river plain that stretched south for 100 miles. The city had grown outward from the original fortress over generations, spreading in rings like water from a stone, and the fortress itself, Karath Hold, rose from the center with the confident permanence of something that has never seriously imagined its own destruction. I arrived there as a ward of the crown, with my face uncovered, and my bonded contract dissolved, and the gates opened for the royal party, and I rode through them and tried to feel whatever a person is supposed to feel when their circumstances change as dramatically and as quickly as mine had. What I felt, mostly, was watchful. Edric had briefed me the previous evening on what to expect. I would be given rooms in the hold. I would be introduced to the lineage office where my registry documentation would be formally restored. There would be a period of what he called adjustment, a word he used with the neutral precision of someone describing a process he has observed before and considers manageable, during which my status as a ward of the crown would provide me legal protection while the larger investigation continued. He had not mentioned Chiron. Neither of them mentioned Chiron. I did not ask. The rooms they gave me were on the 3rd level of the hold's northern wing, not grand, but real, with a view of the courtyard gardens below and the mountain range beyond, and enough space to pace if pacing was what a person needed, which it often was. The lineage office was a small, windowless room staffed by 2 scribes who had clearly been briefed on my situation, and were performing a careful, practiced neutrality that I appreciated. They worked through the documentation with methodical thoroughness. Name confirmed. Mother's lineage confirmed. Dormant gift classification confirmed. I sat across from them and answered their questions, and watched my own existence being written back into the record, line by line, and felt the strangeness of it, the profound, slightly dizzying strangeness of becoming, officially, a person again. Afterward, in the corridor, I stood still for a moment and breathed. 3 days passed. I learned the layout of Karath Hold. I found the library on the 2nd level. A real library, extensive, with maps and history, and old pack records that I consumed with the hunger of someone who has been on reduced rations for too long. I spoke with Edric twice about the investigation. I did not see Karen. On the fourth day, the council met. I was not invited to the council. I was not supposed to know the content of it. But I was in the library when it ended, and Edric came to find me, and his expression told me something significant had occurred before he opened his mouth. He sat across from me at the library table. "The council has voted," he said, "to suspend the investigation." I looked at him. Someone made an argument that the lineage irregularities are administrative errors spanning multiple administrations, historical rather than criminal. The vote was 7-5 to pause, a pause of his own. The king voted against the suspension. He was outvoted. My hands were flat on the table in front of me. I looked at them. Who called the vote? Lord Councillor Vane. Edric watched my face carefully. He is one of the 3 families with custodial registry access. Of course he was. What does this mean for the others? The word came out tight. The 7 who can't be located. The process of finding them is officially paused. Edric's voice was dry and precise. The king is pursuing what legal options remain to him. He is, a slight pause, not accepting the situation quietly. I thought about Karen's voice saying, "I don't know yet, but I will." The certainty in it, and the cost of certainty in a room where 7 other people hold the deciding vote. What can I do? The question surprised me slightly as it came out, not because I hadn't been thinking it, but because I hadn't intended to say it aloud. Edric looked at me for a long moment with his permanent skepticism arranged into something more careful. "The dormant gifted wolves that have been found," he said slowly. "You are not the only one here. There are 4 others in Kareth right now, brought in during the presentations over the past 2 years, all in various stages of documentation." I straightened. "The old records," he continued, "describe the deep bond differently in different accounts, but one element is consistent. When multiple dormant gifted wolves are in proximity, there is an amplification effect. The individual gifts strengthen." He held my gaze. "The king believes that if the 5 of you could access the registry directly, together, you might be able to read what was altered. See the original data beneath the official record. Can that be done?" "The king believes it can be done." A pause. "It has not been attempted before, to our knowledge. And if it works? If we can see what was removed? Then the council's argument that the irregularities are historical errors, rather than deliberate crimes, collapses." His voice was as dry as old paper. "Because you would have direct evidence of who made each alteration, and when." I sat for a moment with this, with the weight of it. 4 other people I hadn't met, a gift I barely understood, and a council that had just voted to bury the evidence of what had been done to 31 people, 11 of whom were dead. "When?" I asked. "The king is waiting for your answer first." Edric rose from the table. "Before he asks the others." The library was quiet around us, the specific quiet of a room full of accumulated knowledge, patient and still. "Tell him yes," I said. Chapter 9. The 5 of us met in the lower archive room 2 nights after Edric brought me the proposal. The other 4 had been told only what was necessary, that there was a test of the deep bond that the king required, that participation was voluntary, that the results might matter significantly to people beyond themselves. All 4 had said yes. I learned this without surprise. People who have had their identities erased and restored tend to have a specific relationship with the word matter. Their names were Orin, Pell, Kael, and Drum. Orin was the oldest, perhaps 50, with the careful eyes of someone who had been navigating precarious situations for decades. Pell was young, barely 20, with a restless energy he could not entirely contain. Kaele was quiet, in the same way I was quiet, a learned thing, a managed thing. Drum had been a warrior before his contract, and still carried himself like one, though his dormant status had removed him from pack combat classifications. We sat around the registry table in the lower archive, and Karen stood to the side, not leading, not directing. Present. The distinction felt important, and I thought he understood that it would. Edric explained what we were attempting. The registry table was the original interface, old technology, predating the current administrative system, connected directly to the foundational record, rather than the edited version most scribes accessed. If the deep bond worked the way the old record suggested, our combined presence around the table might allow us to perceive the original data that the altered version had been layered over. We looked at each other. 5 strangers who shared a specific shape of loss. Nothing formal, Oren said. Just sit. We sat. The archive room was cold and smelled of old stone and older paper. The single lamp on the table threw a circle of light that barely reached the walls. I do not know how to describe what happened next in terms that make rational sense, and I have decided not to try to make it rational. It began as warmth. Not external. Internal. In the chest. In the place where I had always felt the absence of my wolf and had always told myself that absence was simply who I was. The warmth grew, and beside it I became aware of something that I can only describe as presence. Not Karen's, not Edric's, the other 4. Not their thoughts, not their feelings. Their existence. Their specific shape in the world, as distinct and identifiable as voices. The table began to show us things. Not visually, not like reading a document. More like understanding arriving whole, without the intermediate step of processing. Names, dates. The specific registry codes that indicated an alteration rather than an original entry. And beneath those altered entries, faint as old writing under new ink but completely, unmistakably there, the originals. I saw my mother's name, my lineage designation, untouched in the foundation, overwritten in the official record with a deletion code signed by a registry custodian. The custodian code resolved into a name, Lord Counselor Vane. But beneath Vane's code, authorizing it, directing it, present on every single altered entry across all 31 files, another signature. Not a custodian's code. An administrative master key that could only belong to one classification of user. The king's own lineage office. And the individual key within that office belonged to a position, not a person. The office of the king's first advisor. The position that Karen's predecessor had appointed 22 years ago, and which had been held since then by a man named Borden. Gray-haired, soft-spoken, present at every council meeting, trusted without question, because that is what 22 years of trusted presence builds. We came out of it slowly, like surfacing from deep water. Pell was shaking. Kaeli had tears on her face she was not aware of yet. Oren sat very still with his hands flat on the table, breathing deliberately. Karen had moved without my noticing to stand beside me, and I became aware of his presence in the way that I was always aware of his presence now, as a specific quality of the air. Borden, I said. My voice was rough. Yes, the word landed with the weight of confirmation. He had already suspected. He had perhaps known, and had needed this to make it unchallengeable. The council suspended the investigation to protect him. Those members who knew, yes. His voice was controlled, tightly, precisely controlled. Those who voted without knowing were manipulated by Vane's framing. What happens now? He looked at me, at the other 4, at the table where 31 lives had been visible in the foundation, intact beneath the erasure. Now, he said, I call the council back. He left the archive room, and Edric went with him, and we 5 sat in the aftermath of what we had done and looked at each other across the table. Pell let out a long breath that shook at the edges. Is it enough? Kaeli's voice was quiet. It should be, Oren said. Whether it is depends on people making the right choice. I thought about the 11 who were dead, about the 7 still missing, about Mira in Dunrath, whose contract Karen had dissolved the night I told him about her, and who I had not yet spoken to, and did not know how to begin. It has to be, I said. The lamp on the table burned steadily. Outside the archive, somewhere above us in the hold, I could hear footsteps moving with purpose. the business of reckoning beginning. We sat and waited for the world to rearrange itself. Chapter 10. Borden was arrested before dawn. The council was recalled at first light, all 12 members, in the formal chamber, with the Iron Fang crest on the wall behind the king's chair, and the morning light coming through the high windows at an angle that made everything look both very real and very old. I was not in the council chamber. I was in the corridor outside it, sitting on a stone bench with Pell beside me, and Oren standing against the opposite wall with his arms crossed, all of us waiting. Edric came out twice over the next 2 hours to update us. The first time, the registry evidence had been presented. 3 council members had immediately moved to dismiss it. 4 had immediately moved to formally enter it into the record. 5 were deliberating. The second time, Borden had confessed, not to everything, and not from remorse. From the calculation of a man who has determined that partial confession and cooperation is less catastrophic than full exposure. He confirmed the alterations. He confirmed Vane's involvement. He named 2 others. He declined to speak about motivation, which Edric said with characteristic dryness was probably because the motivation was complex enough to require its own separate hearing. When Edric came out the third time, his expression was different. "The council has voted," he said. "Unanimously this time, including the 3 who tried to dismiss the evidence initially." A pause. "The investigation is formally reopened with royal authority and council mandate. The 7 missing individuals will be located. The families of the 11 deceased will be notified and compensated under pack law." I pressed my hands to my face for a moment. Just a moment. And Borden? Arrested. Trial before the full council within 30 days. Vane? The same. I lowered my hands. Pell was crying quietly beside me, making no effort to stop. Oren had his eyes closed, his head back against the wall, breathing in the slow, deliberate way of someone managing something large inside a calm exterior. Kael appeared in the corridor from around the corner. She must have been listening from further down, and she sat on the bench on my other side and said nothing, and I said nothing, and we sat there together while the morning moved through the high windows of Carath Hold. I found Karen later, in the courtyard gardens where I had begun to understand he came when he needed the particular quiet of open air. He was standing at the wall that overlooked the lower city, and he heard me coming. Of course he heard me coming, and turned before I reached him. The morning light was different in the capital than in Varek. Softer, more diffuse, the way light becomes when it has more sky to come through. It sat on his face with a quality I had not seen before. Not peace, exactly, but the specific release of tension that looks like peace from the outside. I stopped a few feet away. "It's done," I said. "The beginning of done." His voice was honest in the way I had come to expect from him, precise about what was true, unwilling to round edges. There will be trials. There will be hearings. The 7 missing people may take months to locate. Some of what was lost cannot be restored. I know. 11 people. The weight of those 2 words in his voice, with his face open the way it was in that morning light, hit me in the chest more directly than I was prepared for. "I know," I said again. He was quiet for a moment. Then he took a step toward me. Not the decisive, authority-carrying step I had seen him use in other contexts. Something more careful. "When I pulled your veil," he said, "I did not know what I would find." I looked at him. I knew who you were in the registry. I knew the lineage. I knew the legal situation. He paused. "I did not know you." The courtyard gardens were quiet around us. Somewhere beyond the wall, the city was beginning its morning. And now? My voice came out steadier than I expected. And now? He closed the remaining distance between us in one slow step, and raised his hand to the left side of my face, and rested his palm against the scars with a care so precise and so complete that something in my chest that had been braced for a very long time simply let go. His hand was warm. His eyes were on mine. "I see a woman," he said quietly, who kept her spine straight in 6 years of conditions designed to bend it, who stepped in front of harm for someone else and bore the mark of it without asking anyone to notice, who walked into a room of strangers and solved in one night what I had spent 2 years approaching. I was not going to cry. I had decided at some early point in my life that crying in front of people was a luxury I could not afford, and the habit had calcified into something I was not sure I knew how to undo. My eyes burned. "You are not the sum of what was done to you," he said. "You are not the veil. You are not the contract. You are not the absence in the records." His thumb moved very gently along the line of the topmost scar. "You are Lysa of Dunrath, and you have been seen." The burning in my eyes became something else. The something else became tears, moving down my face in the uncomplicated way of water that has finally found its way past what was holding it. I did not apologize for them. He did not look away. "What happens now?" I asked, which was the question I had been asking since the beginning, and which kept finding new answers. "Whatever you want," he said. "You have your name back. You have your lineage. You have your rights under pack law." A pause, and then in a lower register, for me alone in the quiet of the morning courtyard. "And if you want this, whatever this is that has been growing between us since you stood on that platform and looked at me instead of looking away, then that is here too, for as long as you choose it." The wolf in me, the one that had always been there, deep and dormant and unrecognized, rose fully into my chest for the first time. Not with the crashing urgency I might have expected, with something quieter and more certain. "Recognition. I looked at you," I said, "because you weren't looking at the scars." "I wasn't. You were the first person in 6 years who wasn't." His hand was still against my face. The morning light was very soft. "Then let me keep looking," he said. I stepped into the space that had existed between us since the beginning, and his arms came around me with the same quality as his voice, unhurried, certain, without performance. And I stood in the open air of Karath's courtyard, with my bare face turned toward the morning, and my wolf quiet and settled in my chest at last. 6 years behind the veil. 6 years of learning to live in the margins, to take up no space, to be grateful for small salvations and ask for nothing larger. I was done with small salvations. My name was Lysa of Dunrath. I was registered, documented, lineage restored, rights intact. Somewhere in the north, a girl named Mira was waking up in a house where her contract no longer existed. Somewhere in the capital, 4 people who had shared something profound with me around an old table were beginning the process of figuring out who they were now that they had their records back. And here, in this courtyard, the Alpha King of the Iron Fang kept his word. He was looking, and for the first time in a very long time, I let myself be seen. End.